What about you? Do you like girls?
I don't know.
Boys?
I I think that I like TV shows.
Let me begin with a pretty obvious statement. Horror is a genre that is built on queerness. Specifically, horror was built on gender queerness. Transgender people and horror movies go hand in hand. This is exactly why I want to make horror movies as a trans person. Queerness is often freely expressed in horror films in ways that it is not expressed in other genres. But traditionally, the queerness is often found in the enemy. We can look back at Hitchcock's Psycho to see a classic example about how trans people are often the villains of horror films. Even movies like Silence of the Lambs or Sleepaway Camp, which explicitly state that their villain isn't quote-unquote truly transsexual, but rather a psychopath, a tortured soul, etc., etc., well, these movies still have their villains performing queerness in some capacity, in a way that the audience would recognize and react to. To respond to this history of caricature and stigmatization by making a horror film about the terror of not transitioning is to turn the entire genre on its head. Right? Because I, like many queer people, identify deeply with horror. I was seen, I was heard, and I was known. To quote the director of I Saw the TV Glow, "When you're young and you see a glimpse of something that cuts through in the way that feels more real than real life, what do you do with that? And to what degree do you reassess the life that you're in that does feel real to make room for that kind of transmission? When you see queerness speaking to you on screen, what do you do? And what do you do when that queerness is framed as the enemy?" In the book It Came from the Closet, Queer Reflections on Horror, writer Joe Vallese and others compile essays about the queer experience of both oppression and liberation in the world of scary movies. The idea of identifying with the monster is discussed, since, again, queerness was the monster for a very, very long time. And this is the same conversation that is paralleled in I Saw the TV Glow. Vallese writes, "I eventually came to understand that, while I was busy fretting over whether being gay would displace me from connecting with the films I loved most, queer affection for horror was actively being claimed, recontextualized, and integrated into the culture and community. Just go to one drag show, someone will be doing a horror number. Go to any cosplay convention, there will be a trans person cosplaying a villain. Because of the Hays Code, queerness could only ever be shown in villainy, which is why it appeared so much in horror movies. And honestly, I as a queer person love that, and many other queer people love that. It gives us back power. Yes, be scared of us. You should be. You may try to hurt us, you may try to stomp us out, but we will always come back. Like the undead, like a vampire. We will always come back." Which leads us now to I Saw the TV Glow. I Saw the TV Glow lives in an interesting space in the modern colloquial history of queer horror, because it's a horror movie about queerness, very explicitly. And in order now to talk about where I Saw the TV Glow falls in modern cinema history, we need to talk about third cinema. But what is third cinema? Well, the concept of third cinema implies two other cinemas, so what are they? First cinema is big Hollywood movies. Think celebrities, think Marvel, think big fancy effects, everything big that you can think of when you imagine movies, the blockbuster, the Disney film. Typically, these are mass-funded movies and mass-distributed movies, made by Americans for Americans, or at least American-glorifying audiences, typically made exclusively with American actors and very professional but predictable aesthetics. If you've ever seen Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in a movie, it is probably first cinema. Second cinema refers to art films, or films that differ from the expected polished linear idea of film. This is a film style associated with European films or independent projects, and these movies are typically the ones that if you go to a film class, these ones are probably the one you're studying. Second cinema separates itself from Hollywood cinema by focusing on things other than the plot, things that are typically more emotional, or things that people my age might describe as the vibe. The cinematography will be unconventional, such as having longer takes, more empty spaces on screen, unique lighting, less dialogue, slower pacing, or more pointed sound design, with or without a score. What separates third cinema from both of these previous cinemas is that third cinema is inherently political. Third cinema is political cinema. The term was coined by Argentinian filmmakers Fernando Solanas and Octavio Getino. They produced the film The Hour of Furnaces, one of the best-known third cinema documentary films of the 1960s. The Hour of Furnaces sets the tone for all other third cinema movies. It is a dark, gritty film about political revolution that does not shy away from disgusting, taboo topics and the realities of war. In contrast with these two previous types of cinema we talked about, third cinema speaks to an underprivileged and marginalized class that seeks to counter the culture of Hollywood, or even the culture of film itself. One's instinct might be to associate third cinema with third world, but we have to acknowledge the fact that the third world technically doesn't exist. We're talking about the global south. The movies often come from countries in the global south, yes, but that is not what defines them as third cinema. This does make them inherently third cinema because of the political undertones of movies being made in countries that have been imperialized and colonized. But that is not what necessarily makes a third cinema movie. Third cinema movies are typically about radical political topics. They focus on those who films would normally not focus on. Third cinema is not just movies made on shoestring budgets in impoverished countries, although a lot of them are. Third cinema also relates to film styles, countercultural elements, anti-cinema elements, a lack of celebrity, and ideological themes and political undertones that cannot be ignored. It is film made by the oppressed, for the oppressed. Now I keep emphasizing that third cinema is not just from the quote-unquote third world. From a merely aesthetic standpoint, for example, it's easy to have first and second cinema made in the quote-unquote third world. Simply give someone a budget and the tools, and there is no fundamental reason that someone from the global south would be unable to make a Marvel blockbuster hit. Same goes for second cinema. European directors that start as second cinema art house darlings often transition to first cinema all the time, and vice versa for American directors testing out surrealist art. If that's the case, there is no true concrete reason that a filmmaker from the third world cannot produce the same movies if given the chance. Third cinema. That's where it gets tricky saying who can make what. It comes down to energy and intent, and this makes the situation a lot more nuanced, since, again, third cinema is political cinema, but it cannot be political propaganda, for it has to be, again, by the oppressed, for the oppressed. I think anyone can make a movie about anything, as long as they are respectful, and the content of any film could be about race, gender, classified war, etc. But it's the how, the why, and the greater impact and intention that would divide the first cinema from the third. And, in my opinion, I Saw the TV Glow is an example of third cinema in the first world. But how? The production story of I Saw the TV Glow was one of small budgets, handmade practical effects, limited sets, and a limited distribution. It is also one of anti-cinema, of countercultural filmmaking with a tragic, uncomfortable ending, uncomfortable pacing that acts as a diegetic part of the story, surreal editing, and an acceptance of unreality. It is about wrongness. It is about despair, with hope being this distant, painful thing that the characters in our story don't get access to, but they do get to long for. The hope is only for the audience to find, not the characters, which creates a narrative that stands against the classic expectations of a movie. Because yes, if you're watching this video essay, you probably watch movies of all kind, but your average movie audience does not go into a movie looking for a sad, depressing ending. They just don't. The message of the movie is also one that blatantly critiques not only media, but class divide, and how media reaches certain people. There are mentions of addict, abusive fathers, rich and poor neighborhoods, homelessness, etc. The movie also begins on election night, specifically the election of Clinton against Dole. It is not a coincidence that this is the opening of the film. The film has no coincidences with political stance, on or off screen. The lead actors are both from marginalized groups, with our main protagonist being played by a gay black man, and our second lead being played by a non-binary lesbian. The film is also directed by a trans woman, with many of the follow-up cast, crew, and production team also being people of color and/or openly queer. And then, of course, there is the actual plot of the movie. The plot that follows a closeted trans woman who cannot escape. A closeted trans woman who never comes out, never transitions, and struggles with that for their entire life. It is hard for anyone to watch this movie without crying. Well, almost everyone. We'll get to that in a bit. The structure of I Saw the TV Glow is nonlinear, uncomfortable, and confusing, switching between the television show, The Pinko Pig, and the movie we are watching, which is a story that future Owen is telling us. The back and forth between the Pinko Pig and Owen's quickly fading life are jarring, uncomfortable. Sometimes it's hard to tell where one starts and the other ends. It is written also in a way to only be seen by the in-groups. Only the people who will get it will understand these differences and these transitions. It's written like the movie itself is closeted, coding, hinting at us to be a part of the meta-narrative. It's flagging to us, queer flagging to fellow queers. Again, third cinema is by the oppressed, for the oppressed. This is where I want to note that the word transgender is not said once during the runtime, but it is obvious what this film is about, because it doesn't have to be said. The ones who know will know. The ones who get it will get it. The people who suffer politically under the regimes that torture trans people will see themselves in this movie. We see the terror. We see the horror of not transitioning. It's a horror film in the most abstract and obscure way, in a way that only the core audience would understand. Only those who get it will also see the TV glow. And this is why it is so devastating to see this movie in theaters and see the straight people around you laugh at it. That's what happened to me. That's what happened to a lot of my trans friends. We walk out of those theaters in tears, and they walk out confused and mocking us. This meta experience around the film solidifies it as a political experience to me. It solidifies it as third cinema. Moving into a second Trump term, it's gonna be hard to ignore how this movie's legacy might be altered or rearranged. The president of the Motion Picture Association of America literally congratulated Trump on his victory. So only time will tell what this means for queer people in cinema. For all we know, you might be watching this video essay with a VPN. You might not even have access to this movie anymore. Who's to say? I must admit, I don't have a lot of hope myself. It's hard to. But protest films like these, by trans people, for trans people, demanding to take up space, demanding to take our narrative back, that's amazing. I don't know what will happen to transgender art under a second Trump term. But I do know that I Saw the TV Glow is a beautiful artistic protest film by trans people for trans people, an example of third cinema created by an oppressed class in a first world country to remind us that even in our darkest hours, there is still time.